Imagine saving a company from complete financial ruin with a deal worth nearly $1 billion, only to have them slash your salary by 65% as a thank you. Well, that's exactly what happened to me. And what did I do next? Let's just say they never saw it coming. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Annabelle, and 3 years ago I was living what most people would call the American dream. I had a corner office on the 42nd floor of a glass tower in downtown Chicago, a 6-figure salary, and a reputation as one of the sharpest business development executives in the telecommunications industry. I drove a BMW, lived in a lakefront condo, and honestly believed that hard work and loyalty would always be rewarded. I worked for Meridian Communications, a mid-sized telecom company that had been around for about 15 years. When I joined them 4 years earlier, they were doing well enough. Steady revenue, decent market share in the Midwest, nothing spectacular but solid. The CEO, Richard Blackwood, was one of those old-school executives who talked a big game about family values and taking care of employees. He had this habit of walking around the office, patting people on the back, asking about their kids. Classics. Corporate dad routine. Meridian specialized in providing communication infrastructure to mid-market businesses. Everything from phone systems to internet connectivity to cloud-based collaboration tools. We weren't competing with the giants like Verizon or AT&T, but we had carved out a nice niche serving companies with 500 to 5,000 employees across Illinois, Wisconsin, Indiana, and Ohio. My role was primarily focused on landing new enterprise clients and managing relationships with our biggest accounts. I was good at it. Really good. In my first year, I brought in about $12 million in new business. Second year, $15 million. By my third year, I was consistently the top performer in our sales division, and Richard had started involving me in strategic planning meetings. That's when I first started noticing the cracks. It was a Tuesday morning in March when our CFO, Patricia Vance, called an all-hands meeting. These weren't unusual. Meridian prided itself on transparency, or at least the appearance of it. But this meeting felt different. Patricia looked tired, stressed in a way I'd never seen before. Richard was there too, but he wasn't doing his usual cheerful routine. The numbers Patricia presented were ugly. Really ugly. Our revenue had dropped 18% over the past 6 months. 3 major clients had decided not to renew their contracts, citing budget cuts and internal restructuring. 2 of our biggest competitors had started an aggressive pricing war in our core markets, undercutting us by margins that seemed impossible to match profitably. But the worst part was what Patricia said next. We've been operating at a loss for the past 4 quarters. Our cash reserves are critically low. Without significant new revenue or a major capital injection, we're looking at potential bankruptcy within 8 to 12 months. The room went dead silent. I could hear the hum of the air conditioning, the distant sound of traffic from the street below. Some of my colleagues were staring at their hands, others at the presentation screen, anywhere but at each other's faces. Richard tried to put a positive spin on it. "We're exploring all options," he said. "Cost restructuring, operational efficiency improvements, strategic partnerships. We've weathered storms before, and we'll weather this one too." But I could see it in his eyes. The fear, the uncertainty. This wasn't just another rough patch. This was existential. Over the next few weeks, the atmosphere in the office became increasingly tense. There were whispered conversations in hallways that stopped when you walked by. People started updating their LinkedIn profiles and taking longer lunch breaks that everyone knew were actually job interviews. The coffee machine seemed to be surrounded by small groups of employees discussing layoff rumors and severance packages. Threw myself into my work with even more intensity than usual. If the company was going down, I wasn't going to be the reason. I worked 12-hour days, reached out to every contact in my network, cold-called prospects I'd been putting off for months. I was determined to find something, anything, that could help turn things around. That's when I discovered Pinnacle Industries. I was reviewing industry publications one evening, looking for potential clients who might need our services, when I came across an article about Pinnacle's massive expansion plans. Pinnacle was a manufacturing conglomerate based in Detroit, with operations across automotive, aerospace, and industrial equipment. They were privately held, incredibly successful, and according to the article, about to undergo the largest operational expansion in their 40-year history. The expansion was ambitious beyond anything I'd seen before. Pinnacle was planning to open 7 new manufacturing facilities across the Midwest and Southeast, hire over 3,000 new employees, and integrate their operations with a state-of-the-art digital infrastructure. The total investment was projected at $1.2 billion over 3 years. But here's what caught my attention. Buried in the middle of the article was a single paragraph mentioning that Pinnacle was currently evaluating telecommunications and IT infrastructure providers for this expansion. They needed everything: voice systems, data networks, cloud services, video conferencing, mobile device management, security protocols. It was exactly the kind of comprehensive solution that Meridian could provide. I spent the next 2 days researching everything I could find about Pinnacle Industries, their leadership team, their corporate culture, their expansion timeline, their existing vendor relationships. I discovered that their current telecom provider was a smaller regional company that definitely didn't have the capacity to handle an expansion of this magnitude. The CEO of Pinnacle was a woman named Catherine Morrison, who had taken over the company from her father 5 years earlier and had been systematically modernizing their operations ever since. She had an MBA from Northwestern, served on several industry boards, and had a reputation for being tough but fair in business dealings. Knew this was our shot, maybe our only shot. I put together the most comprehensive proposal I'd ever created, not just a standard pitch deck, but a complete strategic analysis of how Meridian could support Pinnacle's expansion at every level. I outlined cost savings, efficiency improvements, scalability options, and integration timelines. I included case studies from our most successful implementations, detailed technical specifications, and a phased rollout plan that would minimize disruption to their existing operations. The proposal was 127 pages long. I spent 3 weeks refining every detail, checking every calculation, perfecting every presentation slide. I even hired a graphic designer out of my own pocket to make sure it looked absolutely professional. When I presented the opportunity to Richard and the executive team, you could see the hope ignite in their eyes. This wasn't just a potential new client, this was salvation. If we could land Pinnacle Industries, it wouldn't just solve our cash flow problems, it would position us for the kind of growth that could make Meridian a major player in the regional market. Richard immediately approved my request to pursue the opportunity aggressively. "Whatever resources you need," he said. "This is our #1 priority." Getting a meeting with Catherine Morrison took 2 months of persistent but respectful outreach. I called her office every Tuesday at 2 p.m. for 8 weeks straight, always speaking with her assistant, always leaving the same message. Annabelle Chen from Meridian Communications, with a strategic opportunity that could save Pinnacle millions on their expansion project. Finally, her assistant called back. Catherine would give me 30 minutes on a Thursday afternoon in late June. The Pinnacle Industries headquarters was impressive, a gleaming steel and glass complex that screamed success and innovation. Catherine Morrison's office was on the top floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Detroit River. She was younger than I expected, probably early 40s, with silver streaks dark hair and the kind of confident bearing that comes from running a billion-dollar company. "You've been very persistent, Ms. Chen," she said as I sat down across from her massive mahogany desk. "I hope you have something worth my time." I had practiced this presentation dozens of times, but sitting across from Catherine Morrison, I felt the weight of everything riding on the next 30 minutes. Not just my career, but the jobs of 200-plus people back in Chicago who had no idea their futures might depend on how well I could sell our services to this woman. I started with the numbers that mattered to her: cost savings, efficiency improvements, risk mitigation. Then I walked through our technical capabilities, our implementation track record, our support infrastructure. But what really got her attention was when I presented my analysis of the telecommunications challenges specific to their expansion timeline. "You've done your homework," she said, leaning back in her chair about 15 minutes into my presentation. "Most vendors come in here with generic pitches. You're talking about our actual needs." "I believe in understanding the client's business before proposing solutions," I replied. "Your expansion isn't just about adding capacity. It's about creating an integrated operational ecosystem that can scale efficiently while maintaining quality and security standards." She smiled, the first time during our meeting. "Exactly. So many people think bigger just means more of the same. They don't understand that exponential growth requires exponential thinking." By the end of our 30-minute meeting, which had stretched to nearly an hour, Catherine had agreed to let me present to her full executive team. More importantly, she had given me insights into Pinnacle's decision-making process, their timeline, and the key concerns that would drive their vendor selection. The executive presentation was scheduled for 3 weeks later. This time, I wouldn't be going alone. Richard insisted on coming, along with our head of technical operations and our chief engineer. "This is too important for a solo act," he said. "We need to show them our full capabilities." I spent those 3 weeks preparing not just my own presentation, but coaching my colleagues on Pinnacle's culture, priorities, and the specific technical challenges they were facing. I created detailed background briefings, practiced Q&A sessions, and even arranged for us to visit one of Pinnacle's existing facilities so we could better understand their operational environment. The day of the presentation, I was confident, but nervous. We'd done everything possible to prepare, but I knew we were competing against at least 3 other firms, including one of the major national providers who obviously had resources we couldn't match. The Pinnacle executive team was intimidating. 12 senior leaders representing every aspect of their business, from manufacturing to finance to human resources. Catherine introduced us and then sat back to watch how we performed under pressure. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. Our presentation was flawless. Richard opened with the strategic overview, positioning Meridian as a partner rather than just a vendor. Our technical team demonstrated our capabilities with concrete examples and interactive demos. And I closed with the financial analysis that showed exactly how our solution would support their expansion goals while delivering measurable ROI. But the real moment came during the Q&A session. One of their VPs asked a complex question about network security, protocols during the integration phase, something that hadn't been covered in our formal presentation. I could see my colleagues getting nervous, but I had anticipated this exact scenario during my research. I walked to the whiteboard and sketched out a detailed security architecture, explaining how we would maintain their existing protection levels, while seamlessly integrating new systems across multiple locations. I outlined the testing protocols, the rollback procedures, and the monitoring systems that would ensure zero security vulnerabilities during the transition. The room was completely silent as I explained the technical details. When I finished, Catherine looked around at her team, then back at me. "That's exactly the kind of thinking we need," she said. "Someone who understands that security isn't an afterthought. It's the foundation everything else builds on." 2 weeks later, Catherine Morrison called me personally. Pinnacle Industries was awarding Meridian Communications the contract for their complete telecommunications infrastructure expansion. The total value of the deal was $847 million over 3 years, with potential extensions that could bring it close to $1 billion. I hung up the phone and just sat in my office for about 10 minutes, staring out at the Chicago skyline. We had done it. Not only had we saved the company, we had positioned it for unprecedented growth. This single contract would make Meridian one of the most successful mid-market telecom providers in the Midwest. When I walked into Richard's office to give him the news, his reaction was everything I had hoped for. He actually stood up from his desk, came around and hugged me, something I'd never seen him do with any employee. "Annabelle, you just saved this company," he said, and I could see tears in his eyes. "You saved all of our jobs, our families, everything we've built here. I don't know how to thank you." "Just give me the chance to manage this implementation properly," I said. "This is just the beginning." The news spread through the office like wildfire. People were crying, hugging, calling their spouses to share the incredible news. Patricia Vance announced that we were not only solvent again, but positioned for the most profitable years in company history. The mood went from funeral to celebration in a matter of hours. That evening, Richard took the entire executive team out for dinner at the most expensive restaurant in downtown Chicago. He stood up to make a toast, raising his glass of champagne. "To Annabelle Chen," he said, "who reminded us all why we never give up, why we always fight for what we believe in, and why loyalty and excellence will always be rewarded." Everyone clinked glasses, and for that moment, I truly believed that I had found my place in the world. I had proven my value beyond any doubt, secured the future of the company, and earned the respect and gratitude of my colleagues. I had no idea that in less than 6 months, these same people would betray me in ways I never could have imagined. But that part of the story comes later. First, I had to deliver on the promise I'd made to Catherine Morrison and Pinnacle Industries, and that's where things started to get really interesting. The next 8 months were the most intense of my professional life, managing an $847 million implementation across 7 states while coordinating with dozens of subcontractors, equipment suppliers, and Pinnacle's internal teams required a level of organizational precision I'd never experienced before. Catherine Morrison had made it clear from day one that this project would have zero tolerance for delays or cost overruns. "We're betting our company's future on this expansion," she told me during our first project kickoff meeting. "Every day of delay costs us approximately $200,000 in lost productivity and market opportunity." I assembled a team of 12 specialists from within Meridian, pulling our best people from existing accounts. This caused some internal friction. Other account managers weren't thrilled about losing their top performers to my project, but Richard backed me completely. "Whatever Annabelle needs," became his standard response to any resource requests. The technical challenges were staggering. Pinnacle's 7 new facilities were spread across Michigan, Ohio, Kentucky, Tennessee, North Carolina, Georgia, and Alabama. Each location had different local regulations, different existing infrastructure, and different operational requirements. The automotive facility in Tennessee needed ultra-low latency connections for robotic manufacturing systems. The aerospace plant in North Carolina required military-grade security protocols. The distribution center in Georgia needed massive bandwidth capacity for real-time inventory management across 2.8 million square feet of warehouse space. But the real complexity came from Catherine's insistence that all 7 facilities be fully integrated from day one. Not a phased rollout where we could learn and adjust. Everything had to work perfectly, simultaneously, across the entire network. I spent 4 days a week traveling between sites, personally overseeing installations and troubleshooting problems that our local contractors couldn't handle. My apartment in Chicago became just a place to do laundry and pick up clean clothes. I was living in hotel rooms, eating airport food, and having conference calls from rental car passenger seats while my team members drove between job sites. The pressure was incredible, but so was the adrenaline. Every problem we solved, every milestone we hit. Every successful test of a new system component felt like a small victory in what was becoming the defining project of my career. My team started calling me the General because of how I coordinated multiple simultaneous operations across vast distances. 3 months into the implementation, we hit our first major crisis. The fiber optic installation at the Michigan facility ran into an unexpected underground utility conflict. The city's records showed clear routing, but when our contractors started digging, they discovered an unmarked gas line that forced us to completely redesign the network entry point. This wasn't just a technical problem, it was a timeline problem. The Michigan facility was scheduled to begin operations in 6 weeks, and Pinnacle had already committed to major automotive contracts that depended on that timeline. A delay here would cascade through their entire expansion schedule. I flew to Detroit on a Thursday evening and spent the next 72 hours in what felt like a war room with city engineers, utility company representatives, our contractors, and Pinnacle's facility managers. We explored 17 different routing options, 3 alternative technology solutions, and even considered temporary solutions that could be upgraded later. Finally, on Sunday night, I proposed something that nobody else had thought of. Instead of trying to route around the gas line, we could use the existing building's internal structure to create a distributed entry system. Multiple smaller fiber feeds coming in through different access points, all connecting to a central hub inside the facility. It would require more equipment and more complex configuration, but it would actually provide better redundancy than the original single-point entry design. Catherine Morrison drove out to the facility personally on Monday morning to review our solution. She spent 2 hours walking through the technical specifications with our engineering team, asking detailed questions about performance implications, maintenance requirements, and long-term scalability. "This is actually better than what we originally planned," she said finally. "More expensive, but better. Do it." That moment crystallized something important about Catherine and about this entire project. She wasn't just focused on getting it done. She was focused on getting it done right. Quality and long-term performance mattered more than short-term cost savings. It was exactly the kind of client relationship that could transform a company like Meridian. The Michigan crisis resolution became a template for how we handled problems throughout the rest of the implementation. When we discovered that the existing electrical infrastructure at the North Carolina facility couldn't support our planned equipment load, we didn't just install bigger power supplies, we redesigned the entire system to be more energy efficient. When local internet providers in Alabama couldn't deliver the bandwidth we needed, we didn't compromise on performance. We built a private microwave link to connect directly to a fiber backbone 60 miles away. Each solution was more complex and more expensive than the obvious alternatives, but each solution was also better than what anyone had originally envisioned. Catherine and her team noticed. They started referring other potential vendors to us, asking our opinions on technology decisions outside our direct scope, and treating us as strategic partners rather than just service providers. By month 6, the implementation was not only on schedule, but ahead of schedule. We had successfully completed installations at 4 of the 7 facilities, with the remaining 3 sites progressing smoothly. More importantly, the facilities that were already operational were performing beyond expectations. Production efficiency numbers were coming in 12–15% higher than Pinnacle's projections, primarily because our communication systems were enabling better coordination between departments and faster response times to operational issues. This is when Richard started talking about my future at Meridian in terms I'd never heard before. "You've proven yourself at a level that goes beyond sales, beyond account management," he told me during one of our weekly project review meetings. "You're thinking like an executive, operating like an owner. We need to start discussing your long-term role here." He began including me in strategic planning sessions that had previously been limited to the C-suite. Marketing decisions, hiring, plans, potential acquisitions, new market opportunities. Suddenly, I was being consulted on everything. Other executives started deferring to my opinions on major accounts, recognizing that I had achieved something none of them had ever accomplished. Patricia Vance, our CFO, pulled me aside after one particularly successful quarterly review. "Annabelle, I need you to understand what you've accomplished here," she said. "This Pinnacle contract doesn't just represent revenue, it represents credibility. Other major companies are starting to look at us as a serious player. We're getting inquiries from prospects who would never have considered us before." She was right. The phones were ringing constantly with new business inquiries. Companies that had heard about our work with Pinnacle wanted to know if we could handle similarly complex projects for them. Our pipeline of potential new business had grown from $23 million to over $180 million in just 6 months. The success was intoxicating. I started imagining myself as a partner in the firm, maybe even eventually starting my own company with the reputation and connections I was building. The financial reward seemed inevitable. Surely a project this successful would result in significant bonuses, equity participation, maybe even a promotion to the executive team. But I was also exhausted. The constant travel, the high stakes, problem solving, the pressure of managing such a visible project was taking a toll. I'd lost 12 pounds, developed chronic insomnia, and hadn't had a real conversation with friends or family in months. My entire life had become this project. Still, I pushed through. Month 7 brought the successful launch of the North Carolina facility, followed 2 weeks later by Georgia. The performance metrics were consistently exceeding expectations. "Catherine," Morrison sent me a handwritten note after the Georgia launch. "Annabelle, your team's work is enabling us to redefine what's possible in our industry. Thank you for your partnership and excellence." By month 8, we were down to the final facility in Alabama, the largest and most complex of all 7 sites. This was Pinnacle's new flagship distribution center, designed to serve their entire Southeast market. If we could successfully complete this installation, the project would be finished ahead of schedule and under budget, despite all the enhanced solutions we'd implemented along the way. The Alabama installation went flawlessly. Our team had learned so much from the previous 6 sites that we were able to anticipate and prevent problems before they occurred. The final system tests were completed on a Wednesday in early February, and by Friday, the facility was fully operational and integrated with Pinnacle's entire network. I stood in the parking lot of that Alabama facility on a cold February evening, watching trucks load with products destined for customers across the Southeast, knowing that every communication enabling that operation was flowing through systems my team had designed and installed. It was one of the most professionally satisfying moments of my life. Catherine Morrison flew down personally for the final project review. She walked through the facility with me and her operations manager, testing communication systems, reviewing performance dashboards, and checking integration points with their other facilities. "Remarkable," she said as we concluded the tour. "Not just that you delivered everything you promised, but that you consistently delivered more than we expected. This has been the smoothest major project implementation in our company's history." The project was officially completed on February 18th, 2 weeks ahead of schedule and 3% under the revised budget. Total value delivered: $847 million in infrastructure across 7 states, supporting over 3,000 new employees and enabling $2.3 billion in annual productive capacity for Pinnacle Industries. I flew back to Chicago that evening, thinking about how I would celebrate this achievement, how the company would recognize what we'd accomplished, and what exciting new opportunities would be available now that I'd proven I could handle projects of this magnitude. I had no idea that Richard Blackwood and the rest of Meridian's executive team were already meeting to discuss a very different kind of future for me. The first sign something was wrong came 3 days after I returned from Alabama. I walked into the office Monday morning expecting congratulations, maybe a company-wide announcement about our successful completion of the Pinnacle project. Instead, I found an email from HR requesting a meeting at 2 p.m. that afternoon. Sarah. Martinez from Human Resources had always been friendly with me. We'd chatted about everything from weekend plans to her daughter's college applications, but when I walked into her office that Monday afternoon, her demeanor was completely different. Professional, distant, almost cold. "Annabelle, please have a seat," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. There was a manila folder in front of her, and she kept her hands folded on top of it. "We need to discuss some changes to your employment terms." "Changes?" I asked. "What kind of changes?" "The company has completed a comprehensive review of compensation structures across all departments," she said, reading from what was obviously a prepared script. "As part of this review, we've identified several positions where current compensation levels are not aligned with market standards and internal equity considerations." I felt my stomach drop. "Sarah, are you talking about my salary?" She opened the folder and slid a document across the desk. "Your new compensation package is outlined here. The changes will take effect with your next paycheck." I picked up the document and read the first line 3 times before the numbers sunk in. My annual salary was being reduced from $185,000 to $65,000, a 65% pay cut. "This has to be some kind of mistake," I said, looking up at Sarah. "I just completed the largest project in company history. I saved this company from bankruptcy. You're cutting my salary by 2/3? "The decision has been made by the executive committee after careful consideration of multiple factors," Sarah replied, still reading from her script. "Your performance on the Pinnacle project has been noted and appreciated. However, the company must ensure sustainable compensation structures moving forward." "Sustainable compensation structures?" I could feel my voice rising. "Sarah, I just delivered $847 million in revenue. I personally negotiated and managed a project that transformed this company's entire future. How is cutting my salary sustainable?" "I understand your concerns, Annabelle, but the decision is final. You have 2 options. Accept the new compensation terms, or we can discuss a severance package for voluntary resignation." I stared at her, trying to process what was happening. "I want to speak to Richard. Now." "Mr. Blackwood is unavailable today. He's asked me to handle all compensation adjustment conversations. Then I want to speak to Patricia Vance, or David Chen, or any of the executives who were in those meetings where they thanked me for saving the company." Sarah's expression softened slightly, and for a moment I saw a hint of the person I'd known for 4 years. "Annabelle, I'm sorry. I really am. But they're all aware of this decision. It came from the top." I stood up from the chair, the document still in my hand. "I need time to think about this. Of course, take the rest of the week. Let me know your decision by Friday." I walked out of Sarah's office in a daze. The hallway seemed longer than usual, the fluorescent lights harsher. Colleagues smiled and waved as I passed, completely unaware that I'd just been financially gut-punched by the company I'd literally saved from extinction. I went straight to Richard's office, but his assistant, Margaret, confirmed that he was in meetings all day and unavailable. Patricia Vance was traveling on business. David Chen was handling client emergencies. Every single executive who had praised my work, thanked me for my dedication, and promised that loyalty would be rewarded was suddenly unavailable. That evening, I sat in my apartment staring at the compensation adjustment document, trying to understand the logic behind the decision. A 65% pay cut would make it impossible for me to maintain my current lifestyle. My mortgage alone was $3,200 a month. My car payment was $680. My existing financial obligations were based on an income that no longer existed, but the financial impact wasn't even the worst part. The betrayal was. These people had looked me in the eye and told me I was family. They had toasted my success, credited me with saving their jobs, and made me believe that exceptional performance would lead to exceptional rewards. I called in sick Tuesday and Wednesday, spending the time researching employment law and trying to understand if what they were doing was even legal. Turns out, in Illinois, employers can reduce salaries for future work as long as they provide notice and don't breach any specific contract terms. My employment agreement had standard language about compensation being subject to company policies and periodic review. Thursday morning, I decided to try a different approach. Instead of demanding meetings with executives who were avoiding me, I would gather information from other sources. I started with Patricia Vance's assistant, Linda, who had always been chatty about office gossip. "Linda, can I ask you something? Confidentially?" I said, stopping by her desk during lunch when most people were out of the office. "Of course, honey. What's going on?" "Have there been other salary adjustments lately? Other people getting compensation reviews?" Linda looked around to make sure no one was listening, then leaned closer. "Not that I've heard about. Why? Are you having money problems?" "No, it's just, I heard rumors about company-wide compensation reviews, and I wondered if you'd seen anything come through Patricia's office." "The only thing I've seen lately is a lot of meetings about executive bonuses," Linda said. "Patricia's been working on some kind of performance incentive calculations for the senior leadership team. Big numbers, from what I could tell. Executive bonuses. While they were cutting my salary by 65%, they were calculating bonuses for the people who had contributed nothing to the Pinnacle success. I spent Thursday afternoon discreetly checking with other employees about any compensation changes they'd experienced. Sales team members, account managers, technical staff, administrative personnel. Nobody had received notice of salary adjustments. The comprehensive review of compensation structures across all departments was apparently a review of exactly one person, me. Friday morning arrived with another email from Sarah Martinez, reminding me that I needed to provide my decision by end of business that day. Accept the 65% pay cut or take a severance package and leave. I requested one final meeting with Richard Blackwood. Margaret initially told me he wasn't available, but I told her to let him know that I would be making my decision about the compensation adjustment today and needed 5 minutes of his time before I gave my answer to HR. 20 minutes later, Margaret called back. Richard would see me at 4 p.m. His office felt different when I walked in that Friday afternoon. The same leather chairs, the same mahogany desk, the same view of the Chicago skyline. But the warmth that had always characterized our interactions was gone. Richard didn't stand up to greet me, didn't offer me coffee, didn't ask about my family or weekend plans. "Annabelle, I understand you wanted to discuss the compensation adjustment." "Richard, I want to understand why you're doing this to me. After everything we've accomplished together, after what I delivered for this company, why are you cutting my salary by 2/3? He leaned back in his chair and studied me for a moment. "The Pinnacle project is completed. Your role in the company is returning to normal account management responsibilities. The compensation adjustment reflects the ongoing value of that role. Normal account management responsibilities. Richard, I just proved I can handle projects worth nearly $1 billion. I demonstrated capabilities that go far beyond normal account management. Yes, and we appreciate that. But we can't base permanent compensation on temporary project success. We need to ensure fair and sustainable salary structures across the organization." Fair and sustainable? I could feel my composure slipping. "You're giving executive bonuses for a project I delivered while cutting my salary by 65%. How is that fair?" Richard's expression hardened. "How we compensate other employees is not your concern. Your concern is whether you want to continue working here under the revised terms. The revised terms make it impossible for me to maintain my current financial obligations. You know that. This isn't a compensation adjustment. It's a forced resignation. That's your choice to make, Annabelle. We've offered you 2 options. Accept the new terms or take the severance package." I looked at him across that desk, this man who had hugged me 8 months earlier and told me I'd saved the company. "Richard, do you remember what you said when I told you about landing the Pinnacle contract? I remember thanking you for your excellent work. You said I saved this company. You said I saved all of our jobs. You said loyalty and excellence would always be rewarded. And they are rewarded. You're still employed here. You still have a job." At $65,000 a year for someone who just delivered $847 million in revenue, Richard stood up from his desk, signaling that the meeting was over. "Annabelle, I need your decision by 5 p.m. today. HR will handle the paperwork either way." I left his office knowing that my 4-year relationship with Meridian Communications was over. The only question was whether I would quit or let them push me out. But as I walked back to my desk, I realized there was a third option they hadn't considered. I could stay and fight. That evening, I called Catherine Morrison's direct line. She answered on the second ring. "Catherine, this is Annabelle Chen from Meridian. I hope I'm not calling too late?" "Not at all, Annabelle. How are you? I hope you're finally getting some rest after that incredible project completion." "Actually, Catherine, I'm calling because I have a situation I need to discuss with you. It's about my relationship with Meridian Communications." "What kind of situation?" I took a deep breath and told her everything. The salary cut, the executive meetings I'd been excluded from, the executive bonuses being calculated while my compensation was being slashed, the complete betrayal by people who had credited me with saving their company. Catherine listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Annabelle, let me make sure I understand this correctly. The person who negotiated our contract, managed our entire implementation, and delivered results that exceeded every expectation is being punished with a 65% salary reduction. That's correct. And the executives who had nothing to do with our project are receiving bonuses based on the revenue you generated?" "That appears to be the case." "That's not just unfair, Annabelle. That's stupid. Do they understand that you're the primary relationship between Pinnacle and Meridian? Do they realize that our satisfaction with this project is largely based on our confidence in you personally?" I hadn't expected Catherine to respond so strongly. "I don't think they've considered the client relationship implications." "Well, they should have. Annabelle, what are you planning to do?" "I honestly don't know yet. I have to give them an answer by Monday morning. Before you make any final decisions, would you be willing to have lunch with me next week? There might be some options we should discuss." "I'd welcome that opportunity, Catherine." "Good. I'll have my assistant set something up. And Annabelle, don't let them make you feel like you don't have alternatives. Someone with your capabilities and track record has lots of alternatives." After I hung up the phone, I sat in my apartment, thinking about what Catherine had said. She was right. I did have alternatives. The question was whether I was ready to use them. Monday morning, I walked into Sarah Martinez's office with my decision. "I accept the compensation adjustment," I told her. Sarah looked surprised. "You're staying?" "I'm staying," I confirmed, "at least for now." What Sarah didn't know, what none of them knew, was that staying was the first step in a much larger plan. They thought they had cornered me, forced me to accept their terms, demonstrated their power over my career and my future. They had no idea what they had actually done was declare war on someone who had just proven she could accomplish the impossible. My lunch with Catherine Morrison the following Tuesday changed everything. We met at Le Bernardin, a high-end French restaurant in downtown Chicago that Catherine had chosen specifically because it was the kind of place where business conversations could happen privately without interruption. Catherine arrived 15 minutes early and had already secured a corner table away from the main dining area. When I sat down across from her, she wasted no time with pleasantries. "Annabelle, I've been thinking about our conversation all week," she said, leaning forward, slightly. "What Meridian is doing to you isn't just unfair, it's a fundamental breach of business ethics. But more importantly for my company, it's a risk to our ongoing relationship. What do you mean? The Pinnacle project isn't really finished. Yes, the installations are complete and the systems are operational. But we have a 3-year service agreement that requires ongoing support, system updates, expansion coordination, and performance optimization. The person we contracted for that ongoing relationship was you, specifically. I hadn't considered the ongoing service implications. Richard and the team are assuming they can assign someone else to manage the Pinnacle account going forward. That assumption is incorrect. Catherine pulled out her phone and showed me an email. Yesterday, I sent a message to Richard Blackwood informing him that Pinnacle Industries requires you to remain as our primary point of contact for the duration of our contract. Any changes to that arrangement would constitute a material breach of our service agreement. I read the email on her phone. It was diplomatically worded but absolutely clear. Annabelle Chen was to remain as the dedicated account manager for Pinnacle Industries, or Pinnacle would consider terminating the entire service contract and pursuing alternative providers. Catherine, this is incredibly generous, but I don't want you to jeopardize your relationship with Meridian because of my situation. You're not jeopardizing anything. I'm protecting my company's interests. We invested $847 million in infrastructure based largely on our confidence in your capabilities and our trust in your commitment to our success. Allowing Meridian to marginalize you would be terrible business decision-making on my part. She closed her phone and signaled for the waiter. But that's just the defensive strategy. I'm more interested in discussing offensive options. Offensive options? Annabelle? You've proven you can manage projects of this complexity and scale. You've demonstrated technical expertise, client relationship skills, and operational excellence. That frankly surpasses most of the senior executives I work with across all industries. Catherine paused while the waiter took our order, then continued. Have you ever considered starting your own consulting firm? The question caught me completely off guard. My own firm? Catherine, I don't have the capital, the infrastructure, the client base. You have something more valuable than any of those things. You have a proven track record with a billion-dollar client who would be very interested in working with you directly. She explained her thinking over the next hour. Pinnacle Industries was planning additional expansion phases over the next 5 years. Beyond that, Catherine sat on the boards of 3 other major companies, all of which were dealing with similar infrastructure and communication challenges. The market for high-level telecommunications consulting was enormous and underserved by firms with actual implementation experience. Most consulting companies are great at creating PowerPoint presentations and writing reports, Catherine said. Very few can actually execute complex technical projects from conception to completion. You can. But starting a consulting firm, while I'm still employed at Meridian, would create massive conflicts of interest, not to mention potential legal issues. Not if you do it correctly. Catherine smiled. That's why we're having this conversation over lunch instead of in my office. I'm not officially offering you anything. I'm just sharing my observations about market opportunities that might exist for hypothetical consulting firms that might be started by hypothetical former employees of telecommunications companies. I understood what she was really saying. Catherine, Morrison was offering to become my first major client if I had the courage to leave Meridian and strike out on my own. But she was also giving me something more valuable. A strategy for transitioning that would minimize legal risks and maximize my chances of success. Over the next 2 weeks, I began researching the logistics of starting a consulting firm while maintaining my day job at Meridian. Illinois law allowed employees to engage in outside business activities as long as they didn't directly compete with their employer's core business or violate confidentiality agreements. The key was positioning. Meridian Communications was a telecommunications service provider, a consulting firm that advised companies on telecommunications strategy and project management wouldn't necessarily compete directly with Meridian's installation and service business. In fact, it could potentially be complementary. I spent evenings and weekends putting together a business plan, market analysis, service offerings, pricing models, operational requirements, legal structure. I researched other consulting firms in the telecommunications space, studied their client lists, analyzed their fee structures, and identified gaps in the market that my experience could fill. What I discovered was remarkable. The telecommunications industry was full of large implementation firms that could handle basic installations and small consulting companies that could provide strategic advice. But there were very few firms that could bridge the gap between strategy and execution. Most clients had to hire multiple vendors, consultants to develop plans, system integrators to implement technology, and service providers to maintain operations. A firm that could handle all three phases, strategy, implementation, and ongoing optimization, would have enormous competitive advantages. Reduced coordination costs, single-point accountability, integrated solutions that worked seamlessly across all phases. I called it Pinnacle Consulting Group. The name was intentional. It referenced excellence and achievement while subtly acknowledging my signature client without creating obvious conflicts with my current employer. 3 weeks after my lunch with Catherine, I filed the initial paperwork to establish PCG as a limited liability company. I rented a small office space in a building 15 minutes from my apartment. I opened business bank accounts, obtained professional liability insurance, and engaged a law firm to handle employment and intellectual property issues. But I was careful to do everything by the book regarding my relationship with Meridian. I disclosed my consulting firm to HR, emphasizing that it would not compete with Meridian's core business and would not involve any current Meridian clients. Sarah Martinez reviewed my business plan and confirmed that it appeared to comply with company policies regarding outside business activities. What Sarah didn't understand, what none of them understood, was that I wasn't planning to compete with Meridian Communications. I was planning to replace them. The strategy was elegant in its simplicity. Step 1. Establish credibility and generate revenue by providing consulting services to companies that were not Meridian clients. Step 2. Gradually build the capability to handle implementation projects. Step 3. Position PCG as a full service alternative to traditional telecommunications providers. But the real beauty of the plan was in the timing. Meridian's service agreement with Pinnacle Industries included performance standards and client satisfaction requirements. If Meridian failed to meet those standards, if their service quality declined, if they couldn't maintain the systems properly, if they provided inadequate support, Pinnacle would have grounds to terminate the contract and seek alternative providers. I began documenting everything, every service request that took too long to fulfill, every technical issue that wasn't resolved promptly, every instance where Meridian's support team demonstrated insufficient knowledge of the systems I had implemented, every communication gap between Meridian's account management and Pinnacle's operational teams. At the same time, I started building relationships with the subcontractors and suppliers who had worked on the Pinnacle implementation. These companies had worked directly with me for 8 months. They trusted me, they knew my standards, and they were interested in working on future projects. Most importantly, many of them were frustrated with Meridian's payment practices and project management inefficiencies. Several key suppliers mentioned that they would be very interested in working directly with me if I ever decided to handle projects independently. Within 6 weeks of establishing PCG, I had signed 3 consulting contracts totaling $240,000 in revenue, small projects compared to Pinnacle, but significant enough to demonstrate that the business model worked and that my reputation in the industry could generate legitimate opportunities. The first project was with Henderson Manufacturing, a mid-sized industrial company in Milwaukee that needed help planning a technology upgrade for their production facilities. The second was a telecommunications audit for Riverside Financial, a regional bank that was concerned about security vulnerabilities in their communication systems. The third was a strategic planning engagement with Northbrook Logistics, a transportation company that wanted to integrate their warehousing and fleet management systems. Each project was different, but each one reinforced the same conclusion. There was enormous demand for someone who could bridge the gap between technical strategy and practical implementation. Companies were tired of hiring consultants who could write reports, but couldn't actually make things work. Meanwhile, my situation at Meridian continued to deteriorate. The 65% salary cut had made my financial situation precarious, but the psychological impact was even worse. Colleagues who had celebrated my success 8 months earlier now treated me with a mixture of pity and confusion. Nobody understood why the company had punished their most successful performer, and nobody wanted to risk their own careers by associating too closely with someone who had obviously fallen out of favor with senior management. Richard Blackwood. And the executive team made no effort to include me in strategic planning or major account discussions. My opinions were no longer solicited. My expertise was no longer valued. I had been effectively demoted from trusted advisor to basic account administrator. But they had made one critical error in their treatment of me. They had left me as the primary contact for Pinnacle Industries. Catherine Morrison called me directly whenever Pinnacle needed anything related to their telecommunications systems. System performance questions, upgrade planning, integration with new business units, troubleshooting of technical issues. Because I had designed and implemented their entire infrastructure, I was the only person at Meridian who truly understood how everything worked together. This gave me unprecedented visibility into Meridian's service delivery capabilities. And what I saw was troubling. Without me actively managing the Pinnacle relationship, service quality was declining rapidly. Support requests that I would have resolved in hours were taking days. Technical issues that required deep system knowledge were being handled by junior technicians who didn't understand the complexity of Pinnacle's integrated infrastructure. Most concerning, Meridian was trying to cut costs on the Pinnacle account by using less experienced personnel and lower quality equipment for routine maintenance and updates. They were gambling that Pinnacle wouldn't notice the difference, that the complexity of the systems would mask any decline in service quality. They were wrong. Catherine Morrison noticed everything, and she was documenting it just as carefully as I was. "Annabelle," she said during one of our regular check-in calls, "I need to ask you something directly. Is Meridian's service performance declining, or am I being overly critical? What specific issues are you seeing?" Response times are slower. Technical resolutions seem less comprehensive. The people who show up for on-site support don't appear to understand our systems as well as they should. It feels like we're not getting the same level of service we had during the implementation phase. Catherine, you're not being overly critical. The personnel assigned to your account have changed, and the service delivery model has been modified to reduce costs. Modified. How? Less experienced technicians, reduced on-site support hours, standardized response procedures that don't account for the custom solutions we implemented during your project. There was a long pause on Catherine's end of the call. Annabelle, Pinnacle Industries pays premium prices because we expect premium service. If Meridian can't maintain the service levels we contracted for, we need to explore alternatives. I understand completely. Do you know of any alternative providers who might be able to maintain our systems properly? And there it was. The question I had been waiting for Catherine to ask. Actually, I said, I might have some ideas about that. The phone call with Catherine Morrison, where she asked about alternative providers, happened on a Thursday afternoon in late October. By the following Monday, I had prepared a comprehensive proposal that would fundamentally reshape the telecommunications landscape for Pinnacle Industries and destroy Meridian Communications in the process. But I couldn't move too quickly. One wrong step, one legal misstep, one action that could be construed as corporate sabotage or breach of contract, and everything I had built would collapse. So I spent the weekend with my attorney, Marcus Chen, reviewing every detail of my employment agreement with Meridian, every clause of Pinnacle's service contract, and every legal requirement for transitioning business relationships. Annabelle, what you're proposing is aggressive, but it's legal, Marcus told me during our Saturday morning meeting. As long as you comply with the non-disclosure provisions of your Meridian contract and don't actively solicit their clients using proprietary information, you're free to compete for business once those clients express dissatisfaction and seek alternatives. And if Pinnacle terminates their contract with Meridian for cause, then they're free to hire whoever they want for replacement services, including you. The key was establishing clear cause for contract termination. Pinnacle's service agreement with Meridian included specific performance standards, response times for support requests, technical resolution timeframes, system uptime, requirements, and customer satisfaction metrics. If Meridian failed to meet these standards consistently, Pinnacle could terminate the contract with 30 days' notice. Over the next 2 weeks, I worked with Catherine to document every service, failure, every delayed response, every instance where Meridian's support team failed to meet contractual obligations. We weren't creating problems. We were simply documenting the problems that already existed as a result of Meridian's cost-cutting measures and reduced focus on the Pinnacle account. The documentation was devastating. In just 2 weeks, we recorded 14 instances where support response times exceeded contractual requirements, 7 cases where technical resolutions were incomplete or ineffective, 3 situations where on-site technicians arrived without proper equipment or adequate knowledge of Pinnacle's systems, and 1 complete system outage that lasted 6 hours longer than the maximum downtime specified in the service agreement. Catherine, Morrison was furious. "This is not the level of service we contracted for," she told me during one of our calls. "We're paying premium prices for substandard support. If this continues, we'll have no choice but to terminate our agreement with Meridian." "I understand your frustration completely," I replied. "What kind of timeline are you considering making that decision?" "I'm going to give Richard Blackwood one more chance to address these issues. I'm scheduling a meeting with him next week to discuss our concerns about service quality. If he can't provide a credible plan for improvement, we'll begin exploring alternatives." "That seems fair. If you do decide to explore alternatives, I'd be happy to provide some suggestions for providers who might be better suited to handle Pinnacle's specific requirements." The meeting between Catherine Morrison and Richard Blackwood took place on a Tuesday morning at Meridian's offices. I wasn't invited to attend, despite being the primary account contact, but Catherine briefed me on the details that afternoon. Richard's EROI response was disappointing, she told me. He acknowledged the service issues but claimed they were temporary growing pains as his team learned to support our systems. He promised improvements, but couldn't provide specific timelines or measurable commitments. Did he propose any concrete changes to the service delivery model? He offered to assign a senior technician to our account and promised faster response times. But when I asked for written guarantees and penalty clauses for future service failures, he said that wasn't possible under the current contract structure. Catherine's tone made it clear that Richard's response had been inadequate. "Annabelle, I need to ask you directly. If Pinnacle decided to terminate our service agreement with Meridian, would your consulting firm be able to handle the transition to alternative providers?" This was the moment I had been preparing for over the past 3 months. "Catherine, Pinnacle Consulting Group has been building relationships with the same subcontractors and suppliers who worked on your original implementation. We have the technical knowledge, the vendor relationships, and the project management capabilities to handle a transition of this magnitude." "What would that look like practically?" "We would identify replacement service providers who could maintain your existing systems while potentially upgrading components that are currently underperforming. The transition could be managed to minimize disruption to your operations, and we could structure the new service agreements to include the performance guarantees and accountability measures that Meridian was unwilling to provide. And you could..." Handle this while continuing to work at Meridian? Actually, Catherine, a project of this scope would require my full attention. If Pinnacle decided to make this transition, I would need to resign from Meridian and focus entirely on managing your telecommunications infrastructure through PCG. We both understood what I was really saying. Catherine Morrison was about to offer me the opportunity to destroy the company that had betrayed me while building my own business around their most valuable client. Annabelle, I want you to prepare a comprehensive proposal for managing Pinnacle's telecommunications infrastructure through your consulting firm. Include service providers, cost analysis, performance guarantees, and transition timelines. I'll present it to our board of directors next month. When do you need the proposal? 3 weeks. And Annabelle? This proposal should assume that Pinnacle is terminating all relationships with Meridian Communications effective January 1st. I spent the next 3 weeks creating the most comprehensive business proposal of my career. Not just a consulting agreement, but a complete infrastructure management solution that would give Pinnacle better service, better performance, and better value than anything Meridian could provide. The key insight was that Meridian had always functioned as a middleman between Pinnacle and the actual service providers. They marked up equipment costs, added overhead to technical support, and inserted layers of management that slowed down decision-making and problem resolution. By working directly with the underlying suppliers and contractors, PCG could deliver the same services at lower cost with higher quality. The proposal included agreements with Harrison Technical Services for on-site support, advanced network solutions for infrastructure maintenance, quantum communications for carrier services, and data secure systems for cybersecurity monitoring. These were all companies that had worked on the original Pinnacle implementation and were excited about the opportunity to work directly with me rather than through Meridian's bureaucratic procurement process. More importantly, each supplier was willing to provide performance guarantees that went far beyond anything Meridian had ever offered. Guaranteed response times with financial penalties for delays, uptime commitments with service credits for failures, technical resolution standards with escalation procedures that ensured senior expertise would be available when needed. The financial analysis was stunning. Even with PCG's consulting fees included, the total cost of telecommunications services under the new model would be 23% lower than Pinnacle's current payments to Meridian, and the service levels would be dramatically higher. Catherine presented my proposal to Pinnacle's board of directors on a Wednesday morning in November. I wasn't present for the board meeting, but Catherine called me that afternoon with the results. Annabelle, the board approved your proposal unanimously. They were impressed with the cost savings, the service improvements, and the accountability measures you've built into the new structure. That's wonderful news, Catherine. We're going to notify Meridian Communications today that we're terminating our service agreement effective December 31st. We'll be transitioning to Pinnacle Consulting Group beginning January 1st for a 5-year contract with options for renewal. I appreciate Pinnacle's confidence in PCG. I won't let you down. I know you won't. But Annabelle, you understand that this means you'll need to resign from Meridian immediately. There's no way to manage this transition while remaining employed. There. I understand completely. I'll submit my resignation tomorrow morning. That evening, I called Marcus Chen to review the final legal details of my resignation and the transition to full-time consulting. Everything was properly structured to avoid potential lawsuits or non-compete violations. I had built my consulting business using my own expertise and relationships, not Meridian's proprietary information. Pinnacle had legitimately terminated their service agreement due to documented performance failures, and I was free to compete for business that was no longer under contract with my former employer. Thursday morning, I walked into Richard Blackwood's office for the last time as a Meridian Communications employee. Richard, I'm submitting my formal resignation, effective immediately. He looked up from his desk with an expression that was part surprise, part relief. This is rather sudden, Annabelle. Is this about the compensation adjustment? Partly. But mostly it's about pursuing new opportunities that better align with my career goals. What kind of opportunities? I'm expanding my consulting firm to provide full-service telecommunications management for enterprise clients. Richard's expression changed as he began to understand the implications. What enterprise clients? I'm not at liberty to discuss specific client names. But I can tell you that PCG has secured several significant contracts that will require my full attention. Annabelle, I hope you understand that your non-compete agreement prevents you from soliciting Meridian's clients. I'm not soliciting anyone. Richard, I'm simply responding to market demand for higher quality service than some providers are able to deliver. I placed my resignation letter on his desk and turned to leave. But Richard called after me. Annabelle, if this is about the Pinnacle account, I should warn you that we have a binding contract with them through 2027. I paused at his office door and looked back at him. Actually, Richard, I think you should check with Patricia about the status of that contract. I believe you might have received some correspondence from Pinnacle yesterday that requires immediate attention. The look on Richard's face told me that he hadn't been informed about Pinnacle's termination notice yet. He grabbed his phone and started dialing Patricia's extension before I had even left his office. I cleared out my desk and turned in my company, laptop and access cards within 2 hours. Several colleagues stopped by to wish me well, though most of them seemed confused about my sudden departure. Only Sarah Martinez from HR seemed to understand that something significant was happening. Annabelle, I want you to know that I never agreed with the compensation decision, she told me as I packed the last of my personal items. What the company did to you was wrong. I appreciate that, Sarah. But sometimes the best response to unfairness is to create better opportunities elsewhere. As I walked out of the Meridian Communications building for the last time, carrying a cardboard box containing 4 years of my professional life, I felt a mixture of liberation and anticipation. The betrayal that had seemed so devastating 6 months earlier had actually been the catalyst for building something much better than anything I could have achieved as a Meridian employee. My phone rang as I reached my car. It was Catherine Morrison. Annabelle, Richard Blackwood just called me. He's requesting an emergency meeting to discuss Pinnacle's service concerns. I think he finally understands the situation. What did you tell him? I told him that Pinnacle's decision is final. We've lost confidence in Meridian's ability to support our infrastructure, and we're transitioning to a provider who can meet our requirements. Did he ask about the replacement provider? He did. I told him that Pinnacle was very impressed with the capabilities of Pinnacle Consulting Group, and that we're confident in our decision to work with them going forward. I could only imagine Richard's reaction when he realized that the employee he had punished with a 65% pay cut had just walked away with his company's most valuable client. Catherine, when should we schedule our first transition planning meeting? How about Monday morning? We have a lot of work to do, and I want to make sure everything is perfect when we go live on January 1st. Monday morning it is. And Catherine, thank you for giving me this opportunity. Thank you for showing me what real partnership looks like. I think this is going to be the beginning of something exceptional. As I drove home that Thursday evening, I realized that the destruction of Meridian Communications was just getting started. Losing the Pinnacle contract wouldn't just cost them $847 million in revenue. It would cost them their reputation, their credibility, and their ability to compete for other major accounts. But that was only the beginning of what I had planned for them. The next 6 months were a masterclass in how quickly a company can collapse when it loses its foundation. Meridian Communications had built their entire growth strategy around the Pinnacle Industries contract. The $847 million deal hadn't just provided revenue, it had served as their flagship reference for pursuing other major accounts. Every sales presentation, every marketing brochure, every investor meeting highlighted their success with Pinnacle as proof of their capabilities in handling large-scale enterprise projects. When word spread through the industry that Pinnacle had terminated their contract due to service quality issues, the impact was immediate and devastating. Within 2 weeks of my resignation, 3 other major prospects that Meridian had been courting for months suddenly went silent. The telecommunications industry is smaller than most people realize, and news travels fast. If Pinnacle Industries, a company known for its operational excellence, had lost confidence in Meridian's service delivery, other potential clients started questioning whether they wanted to take similar risks. But the real damage came from the financial implications. Meridian had borrowed heavily to finance the infrastructure investments required for the Pinnacle implementation. They had equipment loans, facility leases, and payroll commitments that had been structured around the expectation of steady revenue from their largest client. Losing that revenue stream didn't just impact their profitability, it threatened their ability to meet their existing financial obligations. Patricia Vance, their CFO, started making emergency calls to their banking partners by the second week of December. I learned this from Linda, Patricia's assistant, who had always liked me and was happy to chat when I stopped by the office to pick up my final paycheck and benefit documentation. "Things are really bad, Annabelle," Linda confided during our conversation. "Patricia's been on the phone with the banks constantly, trying to renegotiate loan terms and credit lines. I heard her telling someone that losing the Pinnacle contract put them in violation of their debt covenants." "That sounds serious." "It is. There's talk about potential layoffs right after the holidays, maybe significant ones." Meanwhile, Pinnacle Consulting Group was experiencing the exact opposite trajectory. The transition from Meridian's service model to our new structure went flawlessly. The same contractors and suppliers who had struggled under Meridian's bureaucratic management flourished when working directly with me. Response times improved dramatically, technical issues were resolved faster, and system performance actually exceeded the levels we had achieved during the original implementation. "Catherine," Morrison was thrilled. "Annabelle, I can't believe the difference," she told me during one of our weekly review calls. "It's like we finally have a telecommunications provider who actually understands our business." More importantly, Catherine began referring PCG to her contacts at other companies. The first referral came in February. Morrison Steel Industries, a sister company to Pinnacle that needed a complete telecommunications overhaul for their manufacturing facilities. The second referral arrived in March from Henderson Manufacturing, where Catherine served on the board of directors. Each new client validated the same business model: comprehensive service delivery with direct contractor relationships, performance, guarantees with financial accountability, and strategic consulting that bridged the gap between technology and business operations. Within 6 months, PCG had grown from a one-person consulting firm to a team of 8 professionals managing over $400 million in telecommunications infrastructure across 12 major clients. But the most satisfying development came from an unexpected source. In April, I received a phone call from Marcus Thompson, a senior executive at Telecor Solutions, one of the largest telecommunications companies in the Midwest. Telecor had been watching the market disruption caused by Meridian's collapse and PCG's rapid growth. "Annabelle, we've been following your work with great interest," Marcus told me during our initial conversation. "The service delivery model you've developed with Pinnacle Consulting Group represents exactly the kind of innovation our industry needs." "I appreciate that, Marcus. What did you have in mind?" "Telecor is exploring strategic partnerships with firms that can provide the high-touch, customized service that our enterprise clients are demanding. We're particularly interested in working with someone who has proven capabilities in managing large-scale implementations and ongoing support." The conversation led to a partnership agreement that transformed PCG from a regional consulting firm into a national player. Telecor provided access to their carrier network infrastructure and equipment procurement capabilities, while PCG brought our implementation expertise and client relationship management to Telecor's enterprise accounts. The partnership was announced in June, and the press coverage was extensive. Industry publications highlighted the innovative service model, the impressive client list, and the rapid growth trajectory. But what caught my attention was a small mention in the Chicago Business Journal article about the partnership. The success of Pinnacle Consulting Group represents a significant shift in the telecommunications consulting market, the article noted. Industry analysts suggest that PCG's growth has come partly at the expense of traditional providers like Meridian Communications, which has struggled with client retention and financial stability following the loss of several major accounts. Richard Blackwood and the Meridian executive team were undoubtedly reading the same articles, watching their former employee build a thriving business using the same clients and contractors they had taken for granted. In July, I learned from Sarah Martinez that Meridian Communications was being acquired by Central Tech Corporation, a larger telecommunications company that specialized in turning around struggling firms. The acquisition was described as a strategic consolidation in the press release, but everyone in the industry understood what it really meant. Meridian was bankrupt and being sold for parts. The final confirmation of Meridian's collapse came in August when I received an unexpected phone call from Richard Blackwood himself. "Annabelle, I hope you're willing to take this call." "Of course, Richard. How are you?" "Honestly, I've been better. I'm calling because I wanted to apologize for how we handled your situation last year. The compensation decision was a mistake, and I should have fought harder to prevent it. I appreciate you saying that, Richard. I also wanted to let you know that I understand what happened with the Pinnacle contract. You didn't steal our client. We lost them through our own poor decisions and inadequate service delivery. The telecommunications industry is competitive. Companies succeed or fail based on their ability to meet client expectations. That's exactly right, and we failed to meet expectations while you exceeded them." Richard paused for a moment. "Annabelle, I want you to know that watching what you've built with PCG has been humbling. You've proven that excellence and integrity will always find a way to succeed." "Thank you, Richard. I hope things work out well for you with the acquisition." "Actually, that's part of why I'm calling. Central Tech is restructuring the entire organization, and most of the existing management team will be transitioning out. I'm planning to retire early and spend more time with my family." After I hung up the phone, I sat in my office, a real office now, in a building that PCG owned rather than rented, thinking about the complete reversal of fortunes that had occurred over the past 18 months. The company that had betrayed me with a 65% pay cut was gone, absorbed into a larger corporation and stripped of its identity. The executives who had marginalized me and excluded me from strategic decisions were out of work. The clients who had trusted Meridian were now working with providers who actually valued their business. Meanwhile, I was running a company that generated more revenue in 6 months than my entire salary at Meridian had been over 4 years. I had a team of professionals who respected my leadership and shared my commitment to client service. I had a client base that viewed PCG as a trusted partner rather than just another vendor. But perhaps most importantly, I had proven something to myself that I hadn't fully understood before the Meridian experience. That loyalty and excellence are only valuable when they're working for organizations that deserve them. The betrayal that had seemed so devastating 18 months earlier had actually been the greatest gift Meridian could have given me. By forcing me to leave, they had pushed me to discover capabilities I never would have developed as their employee. By cutting my salary, they had motivated me to build something worth far more than any paycheck they could have offered. Today, Pinnacle Consulting Group manages telecommunications infrastructure for 37 major companies across 14 states. We've handled implementations totaling over $2.8 billion in value, and our client retention rate is 100%. The company that started as my response to betrayal has become the industry leader in enterprise telecommunications consulting. Sometimes, people ask me if I'm angry about what Meridian did to me. The honest answer is no. I'm grateful. They thought they were punishing me for my success. Instead, They were setting me free to achieve success beyond anything I could have imagined while working for them. And that's the most satisfying revenge of all, proving that their biggest mistake wasn't cutting my salary. Their biggest mistake was underestimating what I was capable of achieving when I was no longer limited by their small thinking and short-sighted management. The company that tried to destroy me is gone. The company I built in response is thriving. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. Sometimes the best revenge is getting ahead. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.